When you're struggling with your mental health, the world can seem pretty heavy, like no one understands what you're feeling or you're not sure how to ask for help. But here's the real truth. You're never in this alone. 988 Lifeline's trained crisis counselors are available 24/7 to offer the help and support you need to make it through. No judgment, no stigma, just someone to listen. Text or call 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, day or night. 988. Hope has a new number.
This is Dream Power Radio, the place where your dreams turn into reality. Here is your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Hello, and welcome to Dream Power Radio on the amazing Women and Men of Power Network, the world's leading positive programming network, powered by Raven International. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, the Dream Coach. This is the show where we talk about dreams, both daytime and nighttime dreams, and how you can use them to make the internal shift to a life you love. I love it when I find synchronicity in my life, especially when I find it in two areas I didn't think were connected. This happened to me not too long ago. As you know, I'm a member of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. And I was reading their magazine when I came across a book review that caught my eye. It really made me stop and think. This book is called Midnight in America: Darkness, Sleep, and Dreams During the Civil War. Well, I love history, and I've read a lot of books about the Civil War, but frankly, I never really thought too much about linking the Civil War to dreams. I was so intrigued, I not only bought the book, but sought out its writer to learn more about this. I'm happy to have him as my guest today. Jonathan W. White is an associate professor of American Studies at Christopher Newport University, and he's the author or editor of 10 books and over 100 articles on the Civil War. He's also won several awards for his writing, including a Best Book nod by Civil War Monitor for the book we're about to discuss today. Welcome to Dream Power Radio, John.
Thank you so much for having me.
John, like I said, I've read books on the Civil War, but I don't recall reading a lot about the dreams of the Civil War. So tell me, what made you decide to write this book?
I actually had the idea when I was reading a book about the American Revolution. During the 1790s, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who had been very good friends during the Revolution, became bitter enemies, and their relationship took a huge dive, and it lasted until the 18 teens when a friend of theirs tried to persuade them to become friends again. And he did it in part by persuading them to write to each other about their dreams. And when I read about that, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to write a history of the Civil War, my period of study, through the dreams of those who lived through it? And that's how I got the idea.
It is very fascinating. And I know they were both very active dreamers. So it seems to make a lot of sense that that would be the case. You relate dreams of people who either fought in the war or who had relatives who did. Did you find a common theme between these dreams?
Yeah, I originally wanted to write the book as a history of the war chronologically, starting in 1861 and going to 1865. And I very quickly realized that I wouldn't be able to collect enough dream reports to do that. But as I collected more and more reports, I began to realize that there were common themes that came up. And so the book is divided into several chapters, and each one looks at a different sort of theme. For soldiers, one of the most common dreams was to dream of home. And usually these were very pleasant dreams. They dream about kids, their wives, or hugging their children, or things that they missed from home. I found a Wisconsin soldier who dreamt about cheese, which is kind of funny because we still think about cheese in Wisconsin today. But then they also had dreams of home that let their anxieties show. And so oftentimes these guys dream that when they see their wives don't show any affection towards them. They ignore them. And I think that these soldiers had a fear of marital infidelity during the war, and it came out in their dreams.
One of the other things I found really fascinating was just that there were so many letters about dreams. I mean, was it common for people back then to share their dreams through letters?
Yeah, before the war, people would share their dreams at the breakfast table, and they would wake up in the morning and talk about what they dreamt, or some people had dream manuals that they would look to try to understand the symbolism, what it meant in their dreams. When they are separated by the war, they want to continue those kind of practices. Now they can't do it in person, so they do it through their letters. And so you often find soldiers writing to their wives saying, "I miss you so much. I dream about you at night." Some soldiers would sleep with pictures of their family members underneath their pillows or underneath their heads, hoping that that might help them to dream about the people they were far, far away from.
As somebody who is, has a great fascination with dreams and works with dreams a lot, we often deal with the symbols in dreams, but these dreams that you write about are pretty much straightforward, just writing down their dreams. Did they really take the time to analyze it, or were their dreams just about the things that they were thinking about?
I think you see both. So you see a lot of people who deal with dreams where they think they're showing something about their daily experiences or their deep-seated anxieties. So the dreams of infidelity, I think that these people recognize that they had some fears that their spouse might be unfaithful, and they would write to their spouses about these dreams. And I think it was a way for them to try to communicate their fears, but to do it in a way that maintained a certain level of intimacy. And sharing their dreams with each other was a way to do that, to show the intimacy that persisted between husbands and wives, even as they were afraid of what might be going wrong or what might be going on at home. That's something that is completely outside of their control. But at the same time, you have a lot of people who do believe in dream symbolism and who want to try to understand what their dreams meant. Dream manuals were very easy to purchase back then, were very commonly sought after. And I found one woman who would write extensive letters to her husband about her dreams. She would wake up in the morning and check her dream manual to see what she thought the dreams meant, and then she would write to her husband about it. She was terribly afraid that if she dreamt about church, that meant her husband would be in battle and might be killed or wounded. A lot of Southerners would also go to their slaves to try to understand what their dreams meant. They believed that African Americans had deeper insights into the meaning of dreams. And so I found instances where white Southerners would have a dream that really bothered them and they wanted to know what it meant. So they would share it with an enslaved person and try to get a sense of what it meant. And I think that those kind of things were very widespread, the kind of sense that white Americans believed that Black Americans had a sense of what dreams meant, so much so that there were dream manuals that were sold that were claimed to be written by Africans who had been kidnapped and brought into America. And it's impossible to know who really wrote them, whether it was African immigrants or not. But at least the belief was there, so much so that people knew they could sell dream manuals along those lines.
It's pretty interesting. And because one of the things I did find fascinating in reading this book was that the African Americans did seem to put more stock into the symbolism behind the dreams.
Yeah, that's right. For many Southern Blacks, I think dreams played a very important part in their religious worship. And so if you were going to prove that you had been converted to Christianity or that you had a call to the ministry, you would tell people publicly about the nature of your dreams, maybe dreaming of heaven and hell or the sun or the moon or all sorts of different symbols, and that would confirm for the community that you were now really a Christian or that you were now really called to be a pastor.
Did you find a difference between the dreams of Northern soldiers and Southern soldiers?
It's a great question. In some ways they're similar and in some ways they're different. So Northern soldiers and Southern soldiers are all dreaming about home. They're all having pleasant dreams that they're being reunited with their families. They're also all having these dreams of marital infidelity. And they come out a little bit differently, as you might expect, but they all have these sort of themes. one of my favorite Northern soldier dreams was a guy named Miles Butterfield from Wisconsin. And he wrote a 12-page letter to his wife. And at the beginning of the letter, he says to her, "You're not sending me enough correspondence." And then he describes in great detail this dream where he goes home and his wife ignores him. And he runs into an old friend, and the friend says, "Do you know your wife's been shacking up with a lot of men? And by the way, I'm one of them." And this guy gets really upset in his dream, and he goes to his wife and he pleads with her to take him back. And he says, "I'll forgive everything." And she says, "Get away from me, take your furniture, get it out of the house." And in his dream, he's so upset that he lays down on the train tracks at the local train depot, because he said at this point he had nothing more to live for. And at the very end of this very long dream description, he then again implores her to send him more letters. And so clearly lack of communication from home was having a destructive effect on his psyche. At the same time, Confederates are having similar kind of dreams. I found a guy named William Hardy from Mississippi who wrote to his wife, and he said that in his dream he went home, and again, just like the Northerner, she treated him coolly. She ignored him. He then saw her get into a carriage with a man and go to a party, and then at the party she's dancing with two men, and he pleads with her to come back. And she says no, and she makes fun of him for being so upset about this, all in the dream. And at that point, he gets his double-barrel shotgun and shoots the two men, and then grabs a knife and goes to stab her and himself at the same time. And at that point, he woke up, and he was just physically contorted by this dream experience. And he tried to explain it to her as well. Someone in the regiment found out that his wife was unfaithful, and we've also had long and tedious drill. And so the separation that these Northern and Southern soldiers are having manifests itself in very similar ways. At the same time, there are differences too. Southerners are worried about emancipation. They're worried about the fall of slavery. And so I found an Arkansas soldier who dreamt that he went to his Aunt Polly's house for dinner, and she gave a black man a plate and a seat at the table and didn't give him a plate or a seat. And he couldn't figure out what this meant. And it's very funny as a historian to look at that, because he had this dream right after Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So clearly he was having concerns about that, even though he couldn't quite make the connection in his mind.
One of the other things that was going on is in the battlefield, when soldiers had to sleep in horrible sleeping conditions. How did this affect their dreams?
Yeah, the opening chapter of the book looks at sleeping conditions and just how much noise there was and how many distractions and how hard it was to get a good night's sleep. And what modern sleep science tells us is that if you're really exhausted, you fall into REM sleep much more quickly and your dreams will be more vivid. And so I think the lack of sleep that people experienced during the war helps explain the vividness of the dreams that soldiers were having and why they felt so real and that they were writing home about them. I even found instances of soldiers falling asleep in battle. I found one case where soldiers were in Virginia. It's part of the sort of trench warfare outside of Petersburg in 1864, 65. They fall asleep in battle, and then a cannonball explodes near them, and they both wake up and look at each other. And they had been dreaming of home. They'd been having a pleasant dream of home in the middle of a war, in the middle of combat.
Did you find that their dreams, they talk about the dreams of home, did they ever dream about things other than home?
Oh, sure. They dream about combat. I have a whole chapter in the book on soldiers who dreamt that they would be killed in battle and then were. And those are some of the most remarkable dreams. If you think about it, most people forget their dreams within moments of waking up. I can't even remember what I dreamt a couple of hours ago. I know I remembered when I woke up, but at this point, a few hours later, I don't remember. And so when soldiers woke up in a morning and told their comrades that they dreamt they were going to be killed and then were killed, those dreams really meant something to the men who heard the dream reports. And in the 1880s and 1890s, decades after the war, a lot of these soldiers wrote down the dream reports of their friends who had been killed in battle, who had dreamt about being killed in battle. And I think that gives a sense of just how meaningful dreams were to Americans. For a lot of these guys, these are signs that God is superintending what's going on in their lives, that there's a higher power over what seems like meaningless carnage a lot of the time, and that their deaths then were not in vain. The fact that the dreams had predicted death meant that the death was superintended by someone or something above them.
This is a little dark area to break in, but we do need to take a little break now. We are speaking with history professor Jonathan White about the dreams of the Civil War. We'll be right back. What do Thomas Jefferson, Elias Howe, and Paul McCartney have in common? They all understood the value of dreams, and as a result, the ideas, inventions, and creations from their dreams affect us to this day. What great ideas are you leaving on your pillow at night? Sign up for a complimentary consultation at my website, thedreamcoach.net, and discover why your dreams are a terrible thing to waste.
Welcome back to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Yes, and welcome back to Dream Power Radio. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, and we're talking with Civil War historian Jonathan White about the dreams of the Civil War. John, you also talk about the dreams of famous figures of the Civil War, and there's probably no one more famous than Abraham Lincoln. And he was known for having dreams, actually dreams portending his death. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. The most famous, there are two famous ones that Lincoln is said to have had about his death. The one happened the morning that he woke up for the last time, and it was April 14th, 1865. He was sitting around with his cabinet. They were waiting for the Secretary of War to show up, and while they were waiting, Lincoln decided to tell them about a dream he had the night before. And in this dream, he was on a ship heading toward an unknown shore. And Lincoln believed that this was a symbol or a sign that something good would happen soon. And he hoped it meant that the Confederate armies in North Carolina would surrender very soon. When Lincoln told the story, people didn't really think a whole lot about it in that moment. But then that night, he was shot at Ford's Theater and he died the following morning. And in the wake of his assassination, his cabinet officials began to remember this story that Lincoln had told them. And they thought, well, maybe it wasn't that it was portending the coming of a Confederate surrender, but it was pointing forward to his death. And the story circulated widely in the newspapers. It showed up in newspapers in New York within 3 days of Lincoln's assassination. Within weeks, it was in newspapers as far away as San Francisco. And 4 of the men who were in the room with him that day wrote it down. And so I think it's a very reliable dream report. Although one of the funny things about the dream report is that each of those 4 men put themselves at the center of the conversation with Lincoln, asking him about the nature of this dream. They wanted to be remembered as having been with him at that very pivotal moment at the end of his life. There's another dream that Lincoln is said to have had, also shortly before the assassination. And in this dream, he was in the White House waiting for reports to come in from the front, and he could hear a lot of weeping, but he couldn't see anyone. And in the dream, he walks around the White House and eventually makes his way down to the East Room and doesn't see anyone along the way. And when he gets to the East Room, he sees a coffin and a catafalque being guarded by a soldier. And he goes up to the soldier and says, "Who is dead in the White House?" And the soldier says, "The president. He's been shot by an assassin." And at that point, there's a great burst of grief. And then Lincoln can see all the mourners around him, and he wakes up and he grabs a Bible off the shelf by his bed and he flips through it. And every page he turns to is a passage of scripture about dreams or visions. And this dream has had a lot of purchase in our popular culture. It's appeared in almost every major Lincoln author has written about it. If you remember the show Touched by an Angel from the 80s and 90s, Touched by an Angel did an entire episode about this dream. But this dream, I think, was actually a fabrication. I think, and I was able to use digital research to dig into it, and I found that in the 1870s, someone published a very short little newspaper squib called Abraham Lincoln's Dream, telling the story. And in the 1880s, a literary magazine took this very short newspaper story and expanded it into a more literary story. And Lincoln's private bodyguard named Wardhill Lamon saw this. This is my theory. Saw this literary magazine and thought, oh, that's a really good story. I would look good in it. And so Lamon then expanded it in his own memoirs and put himself in the middle of the story. And historians have taken it ever since and run with it. But I think it was a story that someone just made up, and it's a really compelling story. And so it's gained a life of its own over the years.
Well, it does make a good story, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The other thing was that Lincoln was also a subject of a lot of the soldiers' dreams. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people were dreaming about Lincoln at the time. And so Confederates are having dreams that Lincoln is going to hell, literally. And I found one Richmond attorney who dreamt that he went to heaven looking for the mayor of Richmond, and St. Peter says, oh, he's in the other place. And when this lawyer goes to hell, he finds lots of other lawyers there, and then also finds a seat there for Abraham Lincoln. Northern soldiers had dreams that they met with Lincoln to try to negotiate for promotion. Northern prisoners of war who were languishing in prisons had dreams that they were hoping that Lincoln would get them set free. And so lots of these people are having dreams about Lincoln, hoping that he'll be able to do something for them, or for Confederates, they're seeing him get eternal punishment.
Well, we've talked about Lincoln, but the head of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, also had dreams that were remembered. So can you tell us a bit what he was dreaming about?
Yeah, sure. While Jefferson Davis was in prison at Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia, he suffered sleep deprivation, in part because they were afraid he would commit suicide. And so they kept a light on in his cell 24 hours a day. Every 2 hours, they had a guard, changing of the guard, and they would slam the iron grated door. And they were marching outside of his door nonstop. And so he got very little sleep during his first few months of imprisonment. But he wrote letters to his wife during that time, and he described in these letters that during those very little bits of sleep that he got, he was dreaming about his family. He was dreaming about his wife and his children. And Davis would actually stay awake at night reading very boring books and eating sort of bland food and avoiding certain foods, hoping that when he went to sleep, he wouldn't have frightening dreams. You can imagine this guy has just lost the Civil War. He's in prison. He's facing charges for treason. He could be executed for that. And so he was afraid that he would be tortured in his sleep. But ultimately, the dreams he had seemed to have been pleasant dreams of home and family. His wife, meanwhile, was also writing to him about her dreams. And what's fascinating about that is she wrote to him about the pleasant dreams she had because she wanted to encourage him. But she also had some frightening dreams during and after the war. And she didn't write to him about those. She told other people about her frightening dreams, but she didn't want him to be burdened by the knowing that she was having some nightmares at this time.
Well, we couldn't talk about the Civil War without mentioning Harriet Tubman, who helped lead so many of the slaves to freedom. Would you say it's true that she dreamt the idea of the Underground Railroad?
I don't know that she dreamt the idea of the Underground Railroad, because the Underground Railroad existed before her time, although she's one of the most famous conductors on the railroad. But she certainly had dreams of freedom. She had dreams of flying to the north. And she also had dreams in which she saw famous abolitionists. And so she had one dream where she saw someone and she didn't know who it was. And then later she came to the realization that it was John Brown. And so the idea of gaining freedom through the Underground Railroad and certainly came out in her dreams.
She was also one who saw a lot of the symbolism in dreams.
That's right. For her and for many African Americans, they were very interested in the symbolism of dreams. She had dreams of flying, and that carried great weight in terms of gaining freedom. But she also, if I recollect correctly, had dreams of snakes. And many people in the 19th century were concerned if they had a dream of a snake, they believed that it portended something bad happening. And that probably goes back to beliefs and understandings of the Garden of Eden and the symbolism of a snake being the devil.
Was there anything about uncovering all these dreams that surprised you?
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me most was that for as much as soldiers had pleasant dreams of home, the dreams that women are having on the home front are actually far more terrifying. And so Southern women have nightmares that Yankee hordes are invading their homes and their communities. Northern women are having nightmares. They read about battle in the newspaper, and then they have a dream that they go into combat. I found a number of instances like that. For some of these women, they're terrified by these nightmares, but they're afraid that if they share them with their husbands, just like with Verena Howell Davis, they don't want to undermine their cause by causing their husband to become discouraged so that he deserts. And so these women were used to sharing their dreams at the breakfast table before the war. Now they're not so sure that they can share them because they're afraid of the effect it might have on their husband. I mean, that's how powerful they believe that their dreams are. One of my favorites, though, was a woman named Emma Crutcher from Mississippi. And she had a dream that her husband was wounded in combat and had to have his leg amputated. And she wrote to him about what she called the maximized joy she had when he had his leg amputated, because at that point she realized that he would be of no use in the army, and so he would stay with her. And that if she died, she said, no one else would ever want to marry him because now he's a lame man. And it kind of makes you wonder about the dynamics of that marriage where she's reporting this to her husband, but she's happy about it. I would think he would be a little disturbed.
I would think so, but I guess she figured that, well, that meant he'd be home, so he'd be out of the war. So
that's right.
That would be her reason for that. Do you think that there is, do you have a theory or a reason why people stopped writing down their dreams like this? Because you have this rich history of letters that you've had from the dreams of the Civil War.
Yeah, one of the things I'd wanted to do was write about the dreams of veterans, and it becomes very hard to do that. Part of the reason they stopped writing them down is that they went home. And so when they go home, they no longer have the need to communicate through letters. But there are ways to find the dreams of Civil War veterans, and it's very difficult research, but some of them come out in pension records. And what often happened is you would have a wife who writes to the pension office and says, my husband has these sort of terrible nightmares, or he gets up in the middle of the night and goes running into the woods naked with a gun or something. You see those kind of things in pension records. And it's because of the psychological damage they've experienced during the war. And so wives would write to the pension office trying to explain this to pension officers so that they could get more money from the federal government to care for their husband, who is suffering in these ways. So there are some ways to find the dreams of veterans, but it's very difficult. One of the other, just my favorite dreams, and this is the one I closed the book with, is a guy named Henry Shippen Heidekoper, who fought with a regiment at Gettysburg. And he had his arm amputated at Gettysburg. And in the aftermath of that, he had phantom feelings. So he went home to recuperate, and he would wear a straw hat. And when the straw hat would blow off, he would reach up with his missing right arm to try to grab it. And over time, those phantom feelings disappeared. But in his dreams, he always had two hands. He always had what he called a perfect body. And in 1906, he found out about a surgeon who was doing research on the neurological effects of amputations. And so he typed out a long letter describing his dreams to this surgeon and told about his experiences at Gettysburg and then all the dreams he would have. And in his dreams, he always had a perfect body. Something like that is really rare and really hard to find. But when I found it, I just thought it was so illuminating in terms of how dreams restored this man in a way that he couldn't experience during his waking hours, but he did experience at night.
Mm-hmm. So after having done all this research about dreams, did this make you pay more attention to your dreams?
It's funny. I've always had recurring dreams of a home I grew up in. And so I grew up in a house from the 1720s. And I think part of my passion for history came out of growing up in this home and finding the old trash pit outside and just digging up all sorts of old treasures. And very sadly, the home was torn down a couple years ago because it sat vacant for over 10 or 15 years and just fell into disrepair. And before writing this book, I would have these very disturbing dreams about this home because I just wished I could save it somehow. And ever since I wrote the book, I've not had those dreams nearly as frequently. And I don't know if there's something that happened there in terms of I worked something out for myself through the process of studying other people's dreams. But yeah, my dreams have not been quite as bad, at least in regards to that home, ever since writing the book.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that recurring dreams do deal with an unresolved thing happening in your real life. So if the house had been already destroyed, then your attempts to save it or your dreams about saving it had sort of been resolved, I would say. So
right.
Why you don't
right.
have a dream anymore. But okay, so John, how can we find out about your books?
So I have a website. It's jonathanwhite.org, JONATHAN, white like the color.org. I'm on Twitter. It's Civil War John. It's Civil War JON. And I love to tweet there about the work that I'm doing. I've been actually tweeting a lot about children's books about history lately. And so I think people have been writing to me saying, my Amazon list is filling up with kids' books now. So those are two ways people can follow me.
Wonderful. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us on Dream Power Radio today. We've been speaking with historian and author Jonathan W. White about Civil War dreams. I hope you've enjoyed the program. Until next time, this is Debbie Spector-Weissman saying, sweet dreams, everybody.
You've been listening to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman. For more information on Debbie or to sign up for her newsletter, go to dreampowerradio.com. This has been Dream Power Radio on the amazing Women and Men of Power Network, the world's leading positive programming network, powered by Raven International.